understand. What are your understanding of St Francis of Assisi? What sort of things do you know or remember about him?
Well, we were always told as children that he was the saint who cared for the animals.
Right.
Very interesting. Hot. Thank you.
Sorry?
Join us if you can.
Didn't catch that. Somebody's talking. So, anybody else?
We recall Assisi as being a wonderful place in terms of beauty and the levels of cathedrals and churches there. Although it does have quite a frightening memory for us, particularly for Rosemary, where, what was it, 2-3 years ago, we went, and after we'd done the official sort of walk-arounds and what have you, we were actually given an hour to ourselves and then told to meet effectively half an hour, 3/4 of an hour before the final train outside the cathedral. But unfortunately, unknowns to us, the group had changed the times after we left. By the time we got there, everyone had gone, and of course all the taxis were all tied up. No one would speak English to us at that particular time, so we were getting in despair with that. Ultimately, someone took pity on us, and we got there as the train was in the station, and we got across the line in order to get onto it. And it was the last train of the day. And effectively, we just got on the train just in time. But in particular, I think certainly Rosemary felt that was the worst.
It's a bit traumatic.
Yeah, but yes, the place was absolutely beautiful, and of course the stories of St Francis, the traditional ones, the animal ones are, of course, renowned.
I do comment on that, so we will make a start. So, animals,
Sorry.
and one cat.
Didn't he start the Order of St Clair or the Poor Ladies, was it, or something?
Poor Ladies, yes.
Yeah.
And there's a great story about Claire and her cat, who has given the name of Giorgio. So we will certainly be meeting Claire in a moment. So there we are, St Francis of Assisi, the man you don't know. That's where we begin. Here's some popular images. I've got 3 popular images of him. There is a record, I think it's in the Little Flowers of St Francis. I think he does preach to the birds. But the Little Flowers of St Francis is a bit dubious. So handle with care if you read it. There is the birds. There he is. Top of a mountain by the looks of it. If you move there to 2 more images, I was going to move my still 2 more images with popular Franciscan themes as one. I particularly like the one that's coming up. How about that? I remember once going into, I think it was St John the Divine Church in Handley in Stoke-on-Trent, which is a Roman Catholic church. I think it's now closed. And I went there with a Roman Catholic colleague of mine who was that time delivering the Mass in Latin, which at that time was forbidden, except with permission. And the church had every conceivable bit of Catholic tat in there that you've ever seen, and a good deal which you've never seen before. And I turned to my colleague and I said, "Father, at what point does vulgarity become high art?" Well, you're looking at it. But we've got everything there. We've got a couple of sheep, seem more interested in eating, which is very sheep-like. We've got some flowers, poor old Francis, surrounded by a cloud of birds. We've got San Damiano on the left-hand side. He's bathed with a halo and holy coloured light, you name it. And just in case you hadn't grasped, there's a load of cherubs up there looking on. But that is not what Francis was like. Popular image and artwork deny that Francis was a strong-willed man, often bad-tempered, and prone to aching self-doubt. His temper apparently was volcanic at times. So there's one thing. The man that we think about Francis is not the full Francis. There's much more to him. Much more depth and many unique features about his spirituality, which really we're going to talk about more in a moment. There's a little bit of background there. You can have a look at that. We don't know exactly when he was born. It was either December 1181 or January 1182. Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardoni. And his father was a cloth merchant, very good one, and a very rich one. And he was in France buying cloth, time when Francis was born. And when Dad came back, of course, he was very pleased with his son, and he named him Francesco, the Frenchman. Partly because he'd been in France buying cloth, and partly because his mother was French. Francis spoke fluent French, very obviously, because of his mother. And he also spoke English quite well, I understand. And he went with his father on travels, buying cloth. His early life was famous for its partying, drinking, and womanizing. You cast your mind back to that picture we've just seen. This guy was certainly no virgin, no innocent virgin. Apparently he was stunningly handsome, with piercing black eyes and jet black hair, which you often see on Italian men. It's so black, it's almost blue. Clearly what it was. And handsome, rather like Emma in Jane Austen's novel of the same name, the opening sentence, Emma Woodhouse was handsome, clever, and rich. And that was Francis. He's the man who had everything. So 1202, he joined the army, taken prisoner, and that imprisonment of 1 year began the change. He began to wonder about his life. Was life basically the 13th century version of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But he got back to Assisi and his old life started again, but even more so. And then he had a vision. The vision was when he re-enlisted to go and fight a war somewhere in Italy. And the vision was that he needed to return to Assisi. And when he got back there, he was a changed man. He had a run-in with Dad, because the beggar came to him asking for alms. And he gave him some money. And then he ran after him till he found him in Assisi and gave him all the money he had. Remember, he was a very rich man. He then began to wander about in the countryside. And he literally, physically repaired some churches, including the one at San Damiano, to literally rebuilt it with his own hands. And it was there that he had a vision of Christ. Francis, rebuild my church. That started it. But of course, the church that Christ was talking about wasn't the one in San Damiano. It was the church. And that was his calling. So he did this famous act, which estranged him from his father for his whole life. He sold his father's cloth and gave the money to the priest. But the priest refused the money. And Francis was enraged. And stomped off in high dudgeon. It was a very different view of him. It's a little bit more of the background and we get on to the heart of it. Itinerant preacher and an evangelist. Began about this time. But it was in 1208, so about 3 years wandering around in the hills, in the mountains. He went to Rome. He begged outside the basilica in Rome. He became involved with the lepers. At that time were truly the unclean. There was the involvement with the church of Santa Maria de' Angeli, just outside Assisi, which I think you might have seen. Did you see it, Peter? Did you see that? Okay. He traveled a great deal, notably to Dalmatia. I have seen the church that was founded by him in Croatia. Still perfectly preserved, beautiful Romanesque church. He went to the Holy Land. And of course, 1220, right in the middle of the Crusades. Went to Holy Land. He wanted to be martyred. And that didn't happen. And then returned back to Italy. 1224, a key moment in his life. On the eve of the Holy Cross, celebration, the feast day of the Holy Cross, he had a vision of God, of an angel, and he received the stigmata, which are the wounds of Christ, on his hands, his side, and his feet. So, a lot more, but that's a resume, key points. So, Franciscan spirituality. This is what a real heart of what I want us to think about. So here are 6 key points. The Eucharist is the heart of Franciscan spirituality, together with the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. God is visibly revealed in his creation. All of it. Not just the animals, all of it. If we do not respect and love God's creation, how can we respect and love each other? For we are part of creation. A life found on obedience to God, love for others, and prayer. An understanding of Christian mysticism. Talk about that in a moment. Seeking and experiencing God's love for us, revealed in Christ. That is, the love of God is revealed in Christ. So 6 key features of Franciscan spirituality. And now, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek that, but Francis did have a great love of the troubadours, which were very popular at that time in medieval Europe. Kind of wandering minstrels. Not quite that, but a sort of a very gallant, usually men, walking around, cultured, whatever. He was fascinated by them, but of course that went on his conversion. So the beautiful woman now enters the story. I wonder who that is. Let's have a look. Need to move this around. St. Clare, 2 years younger, 10 years younger than, more or less, than Francis. She lived longer, and I made that very bold statement. St. Clare is Franciscan spirituality. Her spiritual writing is electrifying. And we have a lot of it. We have a good deal of Francis as well. His spiritual writing isn't bad, but Clare has something about it. It just is unbelievably good. And she wasn't the only one. what you notice is Franciscan spirituality, not making a point here, but a great deal of it at the time. Clare was often wrote to her sister, Blessed Agnes, and Blessed Agnes is as good as Clare is. Angela of Foligno, one of the greatest spiritual writers, certainly of her age, of the whole of Christian writing. And these not only are these great Christian people, they're also women. Very important. Christianity owes a great deal to Christian women writers. Even today, our delightful local spiritual writer, Edith Underhill, great contributions. There again, at St Anthony of Padua, he was contemporary with Francis. Francis decided that he needed some brains in the First Order, and St Anthony of Padua fulfilled the need. St Bonaventure, who became Master General towards the end of the 13th century, again, a wonderful spiritual writer. And of course, Jacopone da Todi. A man who lived the Franciscan life. There's a similar background to Francis as well. So, I'm going to leave that up. Any idea who wrote that? Any ideas? It's 20th century.
Is it Solzhenitsyn? Is it Solzhenitsyn?
You're close, Father.
Darling.
Okay, we'll come back to that because it's an incredible quotation.
It really is.
Man not renowned for his Christianity. Let's just go back. You've got a real sort of whistle-stop tour. There's so much on Clare and on Francis. They're well documented with writings of the period, which we know to be genuine. There's also quite a lot of schmaltz floating about then and now about Francis. But what to focus on the Franciscan spirituality, we'll have the discussion now, then we'll go back to that quotation. Has your understanding of Francis changed with what we've looked at tonight? Feel free. silence.
I think Francis, even a cursory glance at all been written about him, and I'm thinking of people like Carlo Coretto.
Oh yeah.
Will soon remove what I call the sort of the fluffy bunny school of spirituality, Francis.
Mm.
His spirituality is rigorously focused on the cross and focused on suffering.
Mm.
He begs in his prayers, he begs for a share in Christ's sufferings. That's all he asks for.
Yeah.
Hence
that is very Franciscan.
It is, hence the stigmata. And it is a far more robust spirituality than perhaps a superficial view gives it credit for. And you know, Francis did the hard yards to the extent where people like Bonaventure were worried about him. They were worried about his physical and mental health, because at times he appeared to be raving. So caught up was he in the mystical presence of God. That's something which is hard to understand. But this is not soft touch Christianity light. This is, you know, this is a rigorous and demanding way of life, with little to support you in terms of material things. And I am sure that as many people have tried and failed to live the Franciscan life fully as have lived it successfully and fruitfully. Because it is so hard. It will compare with any other Cistercian, Carthusian, you know, it is a tough road to follow. But ultimately, you know, the evidence of, when you meet Franciscans, the evidence of joy which comes from that is quite astonishing. And therefore you say to yourself, well, goodness, there's got to be something in this. There's got to be value in this rigorous way of living.
As I mentioned, I did have the great fortune of having the great Franciscan, Anglican Franciscan brother Ramon was my spiritual director for a number of years.
Really? Goodness.
Yep.
I think
So, Sid, the question was, very briefly, we had a very sort of quick whistle-stop tour around him. And Claire, I'm going to read you a bit about Claire in a moment. So the question was, has your view changed? And if so, how?
Actually, Father, my view hasn't changed, but what you have done is you've reminded me of several pilgrimages I went on with the priests from Walsingham, and the Franciscans were very involved in those. And you've probably reminded me of things I did know, things that I've put on one side and probably forgotten, and things that they in many ways made those pilgrimages, because we were made to think. It wasn't just going to holy sites and all of that, but we're allowed to visit places, get into places we would never have been allowed in. So it was privileged, but thanks to the Franciscans.
The aspect of Franciscan spirituality which I love is actually St. Clare. I just want to read you the very good article in the Catholic Encyclopedia. Living with her sisters in the monastery of San Damiano, she emphasized the necessity of peace in their relationships with each other, in order that their spirits might soar toward contemplation of the mystery of the incarnate Word. This is captured in Clare's fourth letter to Agnes. Gaze upon that mirror each day, O Queen and Spouse of Jesus Christ, and continually study your face within it. So she's telling Agnes to look at the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror, and continually study your face. Indeed, blessed poverty, holy humility, and inexpressible charity are reflected in that mirror. Not only is she paying Agnes a compliment, but she's also saying that all of us have that capacity to see those great qualities, poverty, holy humility, and charity, if we look enough at ourselves. As with the grace of God, you can contemplate them throughout the entire mirror. That is the poverty of him who was placed in a manger, the holy humility, the blessed poverty, the untold labors and burdens that he endured, the ineffable charity that led him to suffer on the wood of the cross and to die there, the most shameful death. The author of the article writes, poverty, humility, and charity are conditions and rewards of a life focused on penetrating the great mystery of how God creates and loves in God's own free and eternal choice for the incarnation of his Son. Contemplation is a shared journey into the direct experience of the heart of the great Christian mystery of God's love. I think if anything summarizes Franciscan spirituality, it's that. That is for me, only for me. But we all can access it. That's the important thing for me. We can all access it. And these people were ordinary people. Their lives, as if Francis's life is scattered with being human. You know, having a strop with the priest who didn't take the money. You know, biting the head off of a brother. And then being mortified that he'd been so harsh. Clare, this mystical person who expressed love in a way which is unimaginable. They were both, towards the end of their lives, racked with ill health as well, but still carried on. Christian mysticism. Any ideas about that? Anyone? any of you experience some kind of mystical aspect of your prayer life, something which is unexplainable, but is powerful? Something which is ordinary, which is not all sort of, as we saw in the third picture, sort of all holy and whatever. It comes something very ordinary. I remember once myself travelling back on the metro in Manchester, get the train back home, and it was a rainy afternoon, and suddenly the sun came out over the canal, which has been, of course, where the BBC centre is in Manchester, and had this dark sky, dark grey sky, and just this lovely pink light on the horizon. And I looked at it and I was just blown away. Creation is so beautiful. I thought, that is the work of God. No human being could ever do something like that. So it's something I always remember. Any experiences like that? No?
It's not really a mystical experience, but I vividly remember at a time when I was having severe mental health problems, being taken by a priest friend of mine to climb the Old Man of Coniston.
Yeah.
And it was humorous because on the way down, he was attacked by a sheep, and it was very funny. But he said to me, as we were stood at the summit looking around, he said, "Here you are, Father. This is where you are most a priest, because you are standing in the middle of God's good creation, which you have done nothing to deserve, but you are in a position to appreciate and give thanks for it." And it changed my whole life, actually. My understanding of what I do or do not deserve, my understanding of what I am surrounded with, and principally, given the context, the understanding that the dispositions which characterize my life are invariably the ones I feed. That all sorts of dispositions are present within me. The ones I choose to pay attention to are the ones which will dominate. And it was a massive, I kind of almost never recovered from that. And I'm not sure that that's quite what you're looking for in terms of a mystical experience, but the context of it, the place where I was massively significant. And the company was massively significant. And the things that he said at that time of my life were massively significant. So, but it may not quite be what you're looking for. I'm not sure I've ever had what you might term a mystical experience. For me, prayer has always been far more about hard work. I suppose I'm more of a Benedictine at heart, because prayer for me is about work. And that's kind of the way I was brought up. The hardest work we ever do is our prayer, is our life of prayer. And nothing mystical for me tends to come out of that. But I appreciate that's at odds with St Francis, certainly. And I mean, he was very prone, wasn't he, to mystical experiences, and as part of his life of devotion. He couldn't have been otherwise.
I think one of the features of Francis' own prayer life, and indeed that of Clare as well, was the prayer of silence. And I've been deeply envious of that. They certainly mastered it. That is the moments when it's very, very hard. Prayer is hard. But certainly Ramon would have seen what you just said, Father. He would have seen that as a very important piece of spiritual awakening.
Yeah. I suppose it depends how you define mysticism and mystical. Or perhaps how ready we are to accept that that is actually or can be a normative part of the Christian experience. Because I think many people probably react the way I do, which is to say, oh, well, that's clearly not for me. And when it might be, I might be missing critical things. And my own director and I have many earnest conversations about this.
Anybody either tried or experienced the prayer of silence? That is just when one aims just to sit quietly and let in time the mind itself will run out of those intrusive thoughts, and the sitting waiting on God. I can't remember who said that. Just waiting on God.
You know, I'm struggling a little to separate spiritual experiences as against the mystical experience. Well, if you say a spiritual experience, then yes, in adoration of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And in fact, silence is part of that. Certainly, being within one's own space. And there are other experiences where spirituality comes through. I mean, anointing the sick. I think of a personal experience there. Mysticism, I don't know. There's things where one can look and say, is this God at work? And I mean, I can think of one particular instance when we were in Tenerife, coming down Teide, the mountain there, where below us was a rainbow, which was absolutely beautiful. One is used to looking up to find a rainbow. One is not used to looking down and seeing the rainbow. And to me, God's work was in that. Another experience as well, we mentioned hills and what have you. Walking in the lakes, you can invariably, as you get on the tops, you're in the mist and you can't see very much in front of you. And things can take on a completely different view to the mind to actually what they in reality are. And it's easy to see people in the distance that aren't there, or miss people that are there. And relating back to certain gospel experiences, that invariably comes back to me from one's own experience of how things can take on. Would it be right to say that that's a mystical experience? I don't know. Anyway, that's my contribution.
I think the element of the mystical experiences of people. I think it is what it is, and if it is to you, you have that sense that's what it is. It most likely is, I would suggest. There's moments when certainly I've had them, not often, but when I've just sensed the presence of God. It's not always been in silence either, it can be in other things. I can look at something, as you say, I mentioned about the sunset, that sunset, that's part of nature. But the whole of the Franciscan concept is that it is all one. You may see it perhaps in the face of a child, how a child maybe behaves, or how another human being behaves. Just for an instant, you see beyond, you see into something which is infinite and powerful. Time is catching up with us, so we go through the troubadours. Worth certainly a very good book of Franciscan readings covering not only Clare and Francis, which is worth having and gives you a feel for it. The other aspect of writings of both Clare and Francis, particularly Clare, you can very quickly forget just how old it is. It has a really very contemporary feel, and I guess that's how it struck many people through the ages. She's a remarkable woman, and certainly one of the greatest saints, not only of her age, but of all time. So again, a similar background to Francis. She was the daughter of an extremely wealthy and highly placed family in Assisi. Let's just go back to that. I made a mistake. Without doubt, an oppressed multitude had to be liberated. But our method only provoked further oppression and atrocious massacres. My living nightmare is to find myself lost in an ocean of red with blood, of innumerable victims. It is too late now to alter the past, but what was needed to save Russia were 10 Francis of Assisi. We would have conquered the world. Any ideas who said that?
Okay.
Lenin?
Lenin, yeah.
Lenin.
I was thinking Lenin.
You were right.
Yeah.
Lenin, of course, is buried in, as we know, in Red Square in the Mausoleum, or Palace Square, as it is also known in Moscow today. And his wish, Lenin's wish, was to be buried next to his mother in St. Petersburg, because he, like the current president, is a Petersburg man. The president of Russia, shortly after he came to power in the early part of this century, he wanted to fulfill Lenin's wish, but he was advised against it. Mr. Putin's comment was, "It is not Russian to have bodies on display," quote unquote. Quite right, of course. Yeah. He said a good comment about one of the greatest Christians in the world of all time, and a very accurate assessment of what would have happened had Francis been on their side. I don't somehow think he would have been. Where's Father got to?
Father's here.
Father is here down the bottom. Let's move you up there.
I've never found, well, it's not to say that I've never found Franciscan spirituality attractive. I've simply gone down other routes because fortunately the Christian heritage is so rich with so many different approaches to prayer and the spiritual life that we're a bit spoilt for choice very often. And I've been schooled, I suppose, in Benedictine and Ignatian ways of praying. But I have a massive, massive, massive respect for the Franciscan order and for the life, the challenging life which it entails. And I can see exactly where Lenin is coming from when he says what he says, in attempting to find an ideal society. The principles of the Franciscan movement universally enacted would be quite something. We might say that's perhaps unrealistic, but nevertheless, what are we about if it's not to find better ways of living, more Christ-centered ways of living? And to somebody like Lenin, the fact that it was Christ-centered wouldn't have mattered a bit. The point was that he could see the benefit of what was being offered by Francis. I want to go and find out more, which is always the best way to kind of conclude a session like this. Is there any particular reading, Father, that you would recommend for us that we might maybe look at, or if we want to follow this up? Is there any particular sort of one book introduction to Franciscan spirituality?
There is a book by Brother Ramon, and I just can't for the life of me remember that name.
Oh,
there is a very good. Is he going to get it into the picture? There we are. I can't get it. It's a very good reader. It's got extracts from Francis, from Clare, from Bonaventure, Anthony of Padua, some of the more kitsch stuff, like, you know, the Little Flowers of St Francis, that one. That's kind of stuff which was, of course, contemporaneous. You know, started the what I call the kitsch aspect of Francis started before he was dead. So funny. You know, the stories about the wolf.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
Okay. Do you know, very quickly, I'll let, that's something to end on. The story of the wolf in where was it? Gubbio.
Gubbio.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. The wolf was going around doing what wolves do, which is ravage the population, eat sheep, anything else it could find, and didn't know what to do. So Francis said, I will go out and find it and make peace with it, which is apparently what he did. And he gave the gave the wolf a very severe telling off. I mean, it was not good to eat people. So the wolf put its paw out to him, and he took it, and he led it back into the town, so they could see the wolf has now been pacified. The wolf hung around in the town, and went from house to house from then onwards, and getting fed, and died 2 years after the event. When restoration was taking place in the Basilica of St Francis in the town, towards the end of the last century, towards the end of the 19th century, they were doing some major restoration work in it, and they lifted one of the flagstones in the floor, and they found a skeleton of a large wolf. It had obviously been there for an awful long time. So there had been a rumor going around that the wolf had been buried and the basilica had been built on top of it. So there was a wolf, and there is still a wolf in the basilica, still buried in the ground where he was laying. It's a lovely story. But that reader is, it's called A Sense of the Divine. And there are readings for every day of the Christian year. So that's, I think, something I would certainly suggest. If you give me a moment, I will just have a look at, see if I can find Brother Ramon. Just give me a moment. Let's just have a quick look.
I've got him here as the author of a book called Franciscan Spirituality.
Yes, I'm there as well.
And there's also The Flame of Sacred Love, which is the book of his that I know.
Franciscan Spirituality is the one that I'm thinking of. Also, too, for anybody's interested, there are videos of interviews with him on YouTube. So that's quite a good resource. Is he just quickly getting them up? Where are we? Might be wrong, man. Might possibly be wrong. I'm sure there's an interview with him towards the end of his life. He died in 1999, I think it was. Certainly he was very ill by that time. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
That's been extraordinary, and I've now got a whole list of books I'm now going to have to buy, and it's all your fault. You know, we are Amazon's best customers. It's dreadful, but there we are. But if you want to, there is a good list of books about Franciscan spirituality. If you do go to Amazon, simply put in Franciscan spirituality into the search engine, and there are works by Ramon, Daniel Horan, Murray Bodo. You know, there's a good list of good Franciscan authors there. and you know, there will be the one I'm familiar with is by William Short, and it's called Poverty and Joy.
That's right. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, and that's a relatively brief introduction, isn't it? Excellent.
Just Father, if I may, just before we finish, I know that one or two people have been asking about a pilgrimage. It occurred to me in a flash of wisdom a couple of mornings ago that, not obviously immediately, but we might possibly look at something next year for Walsingham.
Yeah.
I know one or two people have been. I'm going to name them, but they have been there. So it might be something possibly to think about.
It would be good. I mean, Holy Trinity has a number of pilgrims who regularly go, including Beryl. Father Ross is leading a pilgrimage from Holy Trinity. I think it's September, isn't it, Father?
That's right, yes.
So, but I think, you know, we can certainly look at expanding that. It's all about availability of places, how many places John can book, but certainly let's keep all of that in mind, because pilgrimages are just wonderful things and fantastic opportunities to take stock. So that's certainly something we need to think about.
Exactly with Walsingham, the thing is to get in early.
I know. Well, John invariably books when we're there for the next year.
That's right. That's what I used to do.
12 months in advance. So, but if we want to expand that, then we'll need to think quite sort of carefully about that. Father Ross, is that something that you could, given that I'm not going to be around, is that something you could talk to John about and see,
yes, definitely,
see what might be possible? And also, if anybody's interested in the possibility of going to Walsingham in 2022 for a weekend pilgrimage, have a word with Father Ross, and just so we can gauge interest. It would be a really good thing to do. Father Tony,
something just a little bit different, and that might be to book time out. It's quite a way, but at the Franciscan house in Alnwick, in Northumberland.
Oh, it's lovely.
You can blast off down to Holy Island.
Alnwick is marvelous.
Absolutely unbelievable.
Don't get the juices going. I shall be fretting now all night. I love it round there. Father, thank you so much, and thank you everybody on an otherwise very emotional night. Father Ross is now going to drink the rest of his prosecco, and
you've probably already done it, haven't you, Father?
and it looks like Thomas has had quite enough excitement for one day. So, and who can blame him? Thank you again. It's been fabulous tonight. Lovely to see everybody. See you all next week, if not before.
Thank you, Father.
God bless.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.